Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video, I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the Cushy Crochet Cube Storage Bin, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. Please go to the link in the description, where you'll find both right and left-handed video tutorials, as well as a link to the written pattern and all the supplies you need. To make this pattern, I used 60 yards of Bernat Blanket Extra Thick, which is this great big yarn you can see right here. You can see with my hands just how big this skein of yarn is. Now, I used part of 2 different colors to get a great color block look, but there is enough yarn in one skein to make 1 basket. So if you want to do the color block look like I did, you can get 2 baskets out of 2 skeins, etc. So it's pretty easy to figure out. You'll have just a little bit left over, so eventually you might get an extra basket out of it if you keep on making them. You'll also need a big hook. For this pattern, we're using a USS 25mm crochet hook. So you can get these at your local craft stores. This one is by Susan Bates. It's also known as a US 50. So here's the finished Cushy Crochet Cube Storage Bin. You can see I changed colors about halfway up just to add some interest. As I said, you can totally make this a solid color, make it in stripes, whatever you like. It's all made with single crochets, starting with the square bottom that's worked in rows. Then we work up in rounds for the sides and add a couple of very simple handles there at the end. Now, not only is this a great size for carrying around your project, but it's also the perfect size for all those cube storage bin storage systems that so many of us have in our homes now, whether you got them from a large Swedish retailer, your local home improvement store, or discount store. They all tend to fit those 11 to 12 inch fabric cubes. Well, now there's a crochet version, so you can make them to match your own decor and give them this really great textured look. So let's start crocheting our cube storage bin. Now with this yarn, because it is a jumbo yarn that is very thick, I'm going to recommend you come in a bit further than 6 inches when you start making your slip knot, maybe even a full 12 inches, because that tail gets eaten up as you're making your slip knot. If you start with 6 inches, you're probably going to run out of yarn or end up with a really short tail at the end. So just a quick tip there to start a little bit further in when you go to make your slip knot. This yarn is really textured, so it can take a little extra adjustment to get all those loops just the size you like. So to begin our pattern for our cube storage bin, we start with a chain of 7. So with this yarn, because it is so jumbo and a little different, just make sure you are still yarning over for each of your stitches and pulling each of those chains up and through nicely. This textured yarn, now that I've slipped out, does really actually like to grip onto itself, so it can take a little extra pulling just to get all those stitches through. So keep going here until you have 7 chains made. So now we have our 7 chains made. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So now what I want to do is I want to skip the chain closest to the hook and work a single crochet in each remaining chain across. But when I do that, I prefer to work into the back hump, sort of those little Loch Ness monster humps on the back of the chains there. On not the front or back loop, but rather the hump in back. I find this gives me a really nice edge to work into when I then work my rounds to make the sides of the basket. But if you prefer to work into the top V of the chain, you can absolutely do it however you like. So I'm going to skip that one right there and go to the next one and just insert my hook right under that loop, yarn over, and make a single crochet. Now, with this big jumbo yarn, it can be a little trickier to see your stitches. So it's a good idea to take your time and really look at your stitches as you're making them. And just when they're writ large, they can just look a little bit different. And it doesn't hurt to still break out your stitch markers. Now, these can look really tiny compared to this yarn. So I'm just going to mark the front loop of this first stitch. There we are. So now I know that's the first stitch of my first row. Then I will simply continue to single crochet across, working into each one of those chains. Just make sure you give that yarn a little bit of an extra tug to pull up that loop as needed. So at the end of row 1, you should have a total of 6 single crochets. Rows 2 through 6 are all the same. We simply chain 1 and single crochet in each stitch across. Make sure you go under both of those big loops for each of those stitches, and at the end, you should have a square that is 6 stitches wide and 6 rows tall. So now we've finished the bottom of our storage bin. It's 6 stitches wide and 6 rows tall. Should be approximately 11 inches by 11 inches square with a little bit of wiggle room. It is soft after all. Now we're ready for round 7. We're going to be switching from rows to rounds to work all the way around our square so that we can build up the size of our basket. So the first thing we're going to do is chain 1 and simply single crochet in each stitch across the last row before we turn to walk down the side. After I make this first stitch though, even though it's just like the other stitches we've been doing, again, I want to make sure to put a stitch marker in this one. We're going to be working in rounds now, and it's very easy to accidentally end up working into a slip stitch when you're working in rounds. So having a stitch marker in the first and last stitch of the round really helps you keep your stitches straight. So for right now, I am simply single crocheting across those 6 single crochets that were in our last row here, just as I've been doing all along. And if you watch my other videos, you'll notice I've really changed my grip. When I crochet with standard size hooks, if you will, sort of your regular sized hooks or thread hooks even, I tend to hold my hook more like a pencil. And for these great big hooks and this great big yarn, I really do find it a lot easier to switch up my grip to this knife hold or over the hook hold like this. So if this is your first time using a big jumbo yarn like this and you're finding it a little difficult, try changing your hand hold. Even if you need to switch from this to this one, might work better for you. Everybody's hands are different. So now we have worked our 6 single crochets right across the previous row here. And now it's time to turn and go down the side of the square. We don't want to chain at all. We're not making any sort of flat square. We don't want it to lay flat. We want to start pulling in for our sides. So we're just going to jump right on down to the sides. However, we also want to make sure that we don't start working into the side of the row that we're actually making. So since this is the stitch we just made, we want to make sure we come down here to start working into the sides. Now we want to work 6 single crochets evenly along the side. We worked 6 rows, so the easiest thing is just to work 1 single crochet in the side of each row. So what I like to do is just find a couple loops that are hanging out there on the side, go right in there, and make my single crochet. So there's 6 of these, so you can count these out by, just keep them in your head, or if you want to add another stitch marker in there to help you keep track, you can absolutely do that. But I just find the side of one row, then I come down and find the side of the next row. Let's see, make sure I'm coming down far enough here. Make sure this is the row we're making. So that's the next row. So we come down here for our next one. Sometimes you really just have to take your time and read your work a little bit. So there's our second one along the side here. There we go. Sometimes it wants to come off the hook and I just use my fingers to get it right back on. Then we'll find the side of the third row. There's a couple little loops right there. Finish that single crochet, pull up a little bit more yarn, find the side of the fourth row, and you can actually count back up if you start getting, a little bit lost. Okay, yep, 6, 5, 4, that's our fourth row. Get a couple of loops along the side here. There we are. Oop. Like I say, sometimes with this jumbo yarn, it just takes a little bit more muscle. There we are. So there's 4, so we need 2 more here. There's our 5th one. And then we're down here to the side of our last row. We can read that across here. Just coming right here on the side, wherever it feels good, to make that 6th stitch along the side. There we are. So now we've made 6 stitches along the side. So now we're going to turn and make 6 stitches, 1 in the bottom of each of these foundation stitches. So this is the bottom of our first row. And remember, I worked into that back hump of the stitch. So now we've got these 2 loops left here to work into for this round, which is what I really like having available. So I've got my little tail end there, grabbed the wrong one. Let me put that back down and grab my working yarn. Find the bottom. You can use your tail and slip knot here to help you find the bottom of that very first one if you need to. You can slip our hook right in there and just tuck that tail down out of the side or out of the way here. You can sew it down at the end like the other tail ends for this pattern, or you can crochet over it at this point. Since it is a really cushy textured yarn, crocheting over your ends for this one can work, although I do recommend you take a few stitches to tack them down at the end. So now I'm just single crocheting in each one of these foundation stitches, just as if it was a regular stitch. Like I say, that's what I love about having those 2 loops left there. It just makes such a nice edge to work into. And you can see too how my basket's starting to curl up. Now I'm going to be turning it this way so that I'm working from the outside. But right now, if it wants to curl the other way and sort of bowl up at you, that's totally fine, of course. Just like any other basket or bowl, we can turn it right side out when we're done. So let's see here. It looks like I've got one more stitch here for our foundation chain to work into. And then it is time to work back up that other side. So again, we know we've got 6 rows to work into here. We want to put 6 stitches on this side as well. Make sure that we don't work into the side of the row we're actually making, and that we come down to that first actual row here, which would actually be row 1, the side of row 1. Since we're working up the other side here. And this one can be a little tight, so just take your time, pull your hook through there. There we go. So there's 1. I always like to sort of count these just to make sure I don't end up in the wrong spots here. So there's 2. I will come to the side of the next row, pull up a little bit more yarn from my skein here. So there's the side of our next row, so 3. Oop. It's funny, it's textured, but it's slippery on the wooden hook too. So then we've got 4 right here. And we'll come up to 5. And finally 6. And we want to make sure that we end up in the side of this row. Again, not the row we're actually, this is the round we're making. So we want to be back down here. Very easy to get those mixed up. So that is our final stitch, there we are, for round 7, other than a slip stitch that we'll do to join. So before I do that, I'm going to take one more of those stitch markers here, and I'm going to go ahead and just mark the front loop because it is so big, such a big yarn. I'm going to mark the front loop of that last stitch of the round. So now we know the front, or the first stitch and the last stitch, and any slip stitches won't get confused and mistaken for stitches. If you mistake that slip stitch for a stitch and end up working into it, you could end up increasing, and then your basket's going to flare out rather than having nice straight sides. So now we just want to finish that round off with a slip stitch here. And we can go ahead and make it really tight because we're not going to be working back into it. There we are. And we have finished round 7. So round 7 consisted of 24 single crochets, 6 along each of those sides. We've got our little tail end in there. Make sure you can leave that tail end hanging in there. That way you know this is the inside of your basket. And you can see how it is really starting to pull up on the sides. So rounds 8 and 9 are very simply chain 1, single crochet in each stitch around, and join with a slip stitch. After round 9, we break this color and finish it off so that we can switch to the other color. So today, for our sample, I'm going to go ahead and make a shorter basket for my cubbies. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here. But to make your full-sized cube storage bin, you would work 2 more rounds, rounds 8 and 9, with the same first color, color A, just 1 stitch in each stitch around, join with a slip stitch at the end. Okay, so to finish this off, I've got my slip stitch made, so I'm going to go ahead and just pull this through. I don't want to pull this end through this loop because that creates a pretty big lump. When you've got big jumbo yarns like this, any knots or lumps or anything else you put in it are just going to be that much bigger as well. So I prefer to just go ahead and pull this tail end on through, and then we can just drop it to the inside and take care of it later as we would all our other ends. Now, for this particular yarn, I am going to say I prefer to take care of my ends a little differently. Normally, I'm a big believer in taking a yarn needle and weaving those ends in back and forth in a couple different directions to really lock them in. With this yarn, as you can imagine, that becomes rather difficult. I certainly don't have a yarn needle big enough to hold this, and just weaving it back and forth would probably work well enough to hold it down for something like this basket where, you're probably, it's unlike a blanket. You might not be putting it on or off. It might sit on your shelf, come out and come back. Depends how you use it. What I like to do, though, is I will weave it in just a little bit, and I'll just use my fingers to sort of tuck that end in, under a couple of loops of different stitches and get it woven down in there a little bit. But then what I will do is I will actually take a bit of matching thread and a sewing needle and sew that end down to a neighboring little bit of yarn just on the inside of the basket. Sew those together really well, and trim off the excess. I do have a separate video tutorial that I did on joining jumbo yarns that you can see a demonstration of that in. So now we're ready to jump to round 10. Now, if you wanted to make this all in one color, you wouldn't have needed to cut after round 9. You can just continue with the round 10 instructions as written. But to change colors, we're going to bring in our new one here on round 10. And I want to join with a single crochet. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put that little loop on my hook here. You can see I've got a nice long tail here, and it's coming up over the working yarn. So then I'm just going to hold that in place along with my hook and insert my hook in that first stitch, our first marked stitch there of the previous round. I'm just going to go right in there, yarn over and pull up my loop and make my single crochet. As I do that, I can kind of release that tail end there and let it hang out. And then when I join, I can just take care of that end the way I do the rest of them, tuck it inside and sew it down. I do, however, want to go ahead and move that stitch marker up because with this big yarn, it could very easily get totally lost in there. There we are. So I will go ahead and move that stitch marker right on up to our new first stitch. So then, same thing. We just single crochet in each stitch around for round 10 and round 11, joining with a slip stitch at the end. Then, finally, round 12 is where we make our handles. So I'll see you in time for round 12. So here I've finished round 10, and as I say, round 11 is the same as we've been doing, chain 1, single crochet in each stitch around, continuing up the sides for that basket. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and skip to our round 12 instructions so that we can add those handles that make it so easy to pull out of our bin and also, of course, carry around the house or wherever we need to go. So for round 12, we're going to start with a chain 1, and we're going to single crochet in the first the first 8 stitches. So chain 1 and single crochet in the first 8 stitches. I'm going to go ahead and just take my stitch marker out this time here since we're counting these a little bit more explicitly here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and of course, that's going to take us around that first side there. 7 and 8. There we are. Then we chain 3 and skip 3. And one thing I do want to point out, you'll notice as I'm making this demo, these handles aren't actually lined up very well for this basket. When we crochet, there is a lean to our stitches, and that's fine. That's part of it. But it does change where these handles lie. So if you too are changing the height of your basket, you may want to stop and make sure that your handles are lined up, because I designed the placement of those handles for the full height basket. So on these, they're going to be slightly off on this little short demo version. Again, if you wanted to make a shorter basket for whatever reason, just go ahead and take some time and make sure that your handles are lined up on your basket as you chain and skip over those stitches. You may need to single crochet 7 or 6 instead before you do that chaining. It's just something you're going to have to eyeball because when you adjust the pattern, of course, those adjustments will have to be custom for that basket as well. So for now, we're just following the instructions for round 12 as written, even though we haven't made 12 rounds. So I have my first 8 single crochets. Now I'm going to chain 3, 1, 2, and 3. And go ahead and make those nice tight chains. We're not going to be working back into those. Those are our handle. Then we're going to skip 3 stitches. So if the fuzziness is really hard for you to read, you can kind of read the stitch underneath here. We've got 1, 2, 3 that we're going to skip. Then we come back and single crochet in the next 9. So 1, go right in there, 2, 3, see if I can just spin my yarn here and get some more off here. And 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, And then, unless we screwed up our counting somewhere, we should be able to chain 3, skip 3, 1, 2, 3, and single crochet in the last stitch. And that's our last. I used a yellow stitch marker, unfortunately, so it's a little harder to see, but that is our last marked stitch. So here we are at our second handle. We chain 3, 1, 2, 3. Pull up just a little bit more yarn here so we can finish up. Skip 3 stitches. So we've worked into that one. So we skip 1, 2, 3. Brings us to our last stitch of the round. We just work a single crochet right in there. Let me move that stitch marker out of the way right away, though. There we are. Our last single crochet. And then we can simply join with a slip stitch or join with a seamless join, however you like to join to your last stitch of the round, or join your last round, I should say. There we are. And then we can simply break our yarn and we've got our basket. So your handles should be opposite each other and they should be centered on your side. I do have separate tutorials on the Moogly YouTube channel if you need to about bag handle placement. That will help you if you need to adjust those for a custom basket or bin that you might want to make. And that's how to crochet the Cushy Crochet Cube Storage Bin. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you give this pattern a try to organize your own cube storage. Be sure to go to the link in the description where you can get both those right and left-handed video tutorials, as well as the written pattern and all of the supplies you need. Thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.